seven-headed dragon, with 7 heads, 10 horns, and 7 diadems upon his heads. His tail swept down 1/3 of the stars of heaven and cast them to the earth. The dragon stood before the woman who was about to bear a child, that he might devour her child when she brought it forth. She brought forth a male child, one who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. But her child was caught up to God and to his throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God, in which to be nourished for 1,260 days. Now war arose in heaven, Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon. The dragon and his angels fought, but they were defeated. There was no longer any place for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent, who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. And I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, "Now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God, the authority of Christ have come. For the accuser of our brethren has been thrown down, who accuses them day and night before our God. And they have been conquered by him. They have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb, by the word of their testimony. For they loved not their lives even unto death. Rejoice then, O heaven, and you that dwell therein. But woe to you, O earth and sea, for the devil has come down to you in great wrath, because he knows that his time is short." Saint Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. Be our protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God, who can humbly pray, and do thou, Prince of the heavenly host, by the divine power of God, cast into hell Satan and all the evil spirits who roam throughout the world seeking the ruin of souls. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Okay, so today we talk about, as you can hear from that reading, dragons, particularly this dragon sickness, which is talked about explicitly in The Hobbit. It's actually talked of as a dragon sickness. And if you look at the story of The Hobbit, which we're not going to really delve a lot into that one this time because we have kind of a more of a limited scope. That's a whole nother talk. But the essential story of The Hobbit is about different people having this dragon sickness and sort of how they deal with that. Smaug, definitely. But Bilbo Baggins has a dragon sickness. Thorin has a dragon sickness. The leader of the people of Lake Town has a dragon sickness. The king of the woodland realm, the elves, also has a dragon sickness. And it's all about how they deal with that, how they go, in a sense, through this fire of humility. Some of them don't make it, but the other ones, Bilbo in particular, goes in and comes back, and he's changed. And we're going to talk about, well, what is that dragon sickness? So you can read this up here. This is G.K. Chesterton. And remember what we talked about last time, about sort of the purpose of fairy stories. That fairy stories are, they in a sense, are like heaven judging earth. So when we read a true fairy story, and this is where we have to go through that discernment, because there's a lot of things that are out there, especially in more recent times, in which there's a little bit of twisting of trying to move away from simplicity, which the fairy stories originally were designed of. There's good and there's evil, and sort of that reality that's there. But these old ancient fairy stories, they in a sense remind us of this truth here. And so the baby has known that dragons, they've known dragons intimately ever since he had an imagination, that reality of evil. What a fairy tale provides for him is a St. George to kill the dragon. So the fairy tale, in a sense, it allows us to sort of see evil evil from the perspective of good. If you remember that, like with some of those classics of Jack and the Beanstalk, Jack the Giant Killer, giants are to be killed because they're gigantic. That's sort of the theme that's there. And it's actually an image of pride, which puffs us up, that we need to crush the prideful heart, the growing heart, the big head in a sense. We need to let the helium out, make it go back to normal size. So this is what we're going to be talking about. So, in the Voyage of the Dawn Treader, it says these words: sleeping on a dragon's hoard, with greedy dragonish thoughts in his heart, he had become a dragon himself. Now, does anyone know who that's speaking about? Any Narnian experts right here? Eustace. And we're going to talk a lot about him a little later. Eustace Scrubb, who C.S.Lewis said he almost deserved the name that he was given. Kind of a nasty guy that finds the light a little later. But think about just that image there, sleeping on a dragon's hoard, and that picture of a dragon, because there's sort of different ways of looking at dragons, and I prefer the more like ancient medieval way of looking at it, looking in Beowulf, looking in this kind of world, versus I haven't seen How to Train a Dragon, so I don't want to comment on it. I mean, I bet there's great little fun things in there, but there is a danger of sort of talking about dragons merely as just little dinosaurs, versus the original understanding in a Western civilization is what we see in Smaug, Smaug the Golden, Smaug the Magnificent. He was a pretty bad guy. So, as we enter through the wardrobe, Fairyland opens us up not only seeing the wondrous beauty of our own world. You remember we talked about that last time, the sense of wonder and amazement, but also our fallenness. Remember from Genesis 4, it says this, it says, sin is lurking at your door. Its desire is for you, but you must master it. And that's what the Lord says as a final warning to Cain. Because Cain is saying, I'm jealous. Why aren't you honoring my sacrifice more than Abel's? And God warns Cain. But then the next line, very sadly, is Cain says to his brother, let's go out into this field. And so he doesn't heed the warning here. This idea of sin lurking at your door. And so the fairy story, in a sense, helps us to see our world and to see the reality of evil through the light of truth. So when we're escaping into Fairyland, we are not escaping away from reality, but deeper into reality. And we're able to see more clearly that the dragons in the tales are in fact all around us, and in fact they're actually in us. And then because of their timeless truths, fairy stories can bestow the restorative gift of the power of recovery. This is something that Tolkien would talk about, and this is what recovery means. So one of the chief reasons for fairy stories is recovery, and it's this: to remember who I am, and to recognize that I need to clean my windows so that the things seen clearly may be freed from the drab blur of triteness or familiarity, from what Tolkien will say is possessiveness. And that's really the essence of the dragon sickness. It is this being free from triteness, from this dangerous familiarity, and a possessiveness. And so this is what this actually means. That's Thorin Oakenshield right there from The Hobbit. He's one of those that really falls into this dragon sickness, though he finds healing later on. But a dragon sickness is this. It's a possessive familiarity that blinds us to the goodness, truth, and beauty of the cosmos which we are a part of, because our vision is too centered upon ourselves. So that's the key. Things, even persons, merely become just extensions of me. I own them, or I cease to notice them. I take them for granted. And if you really go to the 7 deadly sins, pride, lust, gluttony, sloth, anger, envy, and despair, think about those through that lens. Pride. I'm the most important person in the world. Everyone else I judge as being less than me in everything. Envy. If someone seems to be doing better than me, I push them down and I find a way of saying, you shouldn't have that, I should have it, because I'm really the one who's important in this world. Lust. I want to satisfy my desires, my pleasures. And so I am going to use this person here, and I care nothing for them. I own them. And I'm going to use them as a commodity. Anger. This person has hurt me, and so I'm going to destroy them. Despair. Nothing in this world matters, and ultimately I'm focused on myself, and so there's no one there that really, really cares about me. Sloth. Let someone else do it. They can serve me. I have better things to do, like sit and do nothing. Gluttony. I'm just going to use all these things and not appreciate the wonder of food, the beauty and the goodness of it. So I'm just going to eat 20,000 Oreo cookies instead of eating 2 and just cherishing how tasty they are. If you eat so much, you can't tell the goodness of it anymore. It just becomes sickening. So do you see this possessive familiarity? So there's this different aspect. Blinds us to the goodness of sort of saying, all the stuff around me, in a sense, I'm better, I'm superior than it. And so even we can look at creation and not see the wonder anymore. And in a sense say, instead of looking at creation saying, how do I see the beauty of the Creator in the midst of it? I might look at it merely and say, how can this serve me? Now, we definitely are called to be stewards of the land, to have dominion, but dominion doesn't mean lose the wonder. You know, if we think about even the Native Americans, how even when they would hunt, they would still give thanks to, they didn't have that fullness of faith, but in many ways, you know, there's a lot that we can learn about saying, you know, thank you, Great Spirit, for the gift of this food right now. And sort of that wonder that's there. I think we can learn a lot about, you know, just that reality there. So it's either I don't see the goodness, the majesty, the wonder, maybe in front of us. Maybe we just go through life and we don't see that this person here is this beautiful mystery that only God knows the fullness of, and we can take them for granted. We can, in a sense, cease to treasure them because they're always around us. Sometimes we can experience profound loneliness in the midst of being around many people, because we can fall into, or others can fall into, the sense of not really taking the effort to care about someone. And that person can say, does anyone really care about me? Because there's a familiarity where everyone is too busy focusing on themselves. I don't know if you've ever seen this very powerful YouTube thing in which everyone is walking around with their technology, and there's someone being hurt, there's someone actually getting ready to jump out of a building, and everyone just has their phones and they're just watching, and the person falls and they're just kind of like that. They take pictures, and then they just keep moving on. And there's this person saying, like, take your phones, move them out of the way. But it's like, that's an extreme version. But sometimes we can just be so zoned in that we don't take the time to look at the person right in front of us and say, you are special. I mean, this is the core of, we might think Mr. Rogers sometimes is hokey, but he's actually very, very deep and profound if you really think about his ability to look at every single person and actually see the image of God within them and to love them in the midst of that. So this is something that we have to see. Where is this kind of possessive familiarity, or this sense of everything is merely here to serve me and everything is a means to my end, versus everything should be treasured and focused on like that? That's really the core of dragon sickness. But why dragons? So think of the image again, a dragon on its hoard. It knows every single coin present. It's enraged if anything is missing. Think about the story of the Hobbit or the story of Beowulf, which are very, very closely tied. This image of this dragon sitting on all this gold that it stole from all the surrounding countrysides. Everyone else is starving out there. They could have used that gold to help in different ways. And he takes it all, he sits on it, and he doesn't use any of it. He just sits on it because it feels good to have everything and have everyone else suffer. And there's a coldness there. Think about a modern day dragon. Do you know who this is? Ebenezer Scrooge. Ebenezer Scrooge is a perfect instance of a human dragon, because he's someone that holds everything as a true miser. He doesn't even heat his house. He doesn't use anything. He just holds on to everything, and it's useless. But if he loses something, just as Smaug loses a tiny gold cup, silver cup, then he's enraged and wants to destroy everyone. Kind of think about, do we ever kind of fall into that? We have all this stuff, but if someone creeps into our space, then all of a sudden we breathe fire. So a dragon, this is Oscar Wilde says this. Oscar Wilde is the one who wrote A Picture of Dorian Gray, which is really a story about him in many ways. A dragon knows the price of everything and the value of nothing. So the whole calculating. Think about if we had friendships like this. Dragons have friendships like this. Maybe you've dated a dragon before. I don't know. But this idea of, I'm going to use this relationship because it does this for me. There's never a thought about the actual value of this friendship. If we treat people as commodities for ourselves, we become a dragon. And ultimately, it's spiritual narcissism. The story of Narcissus, where he just wants to gaze upon himself. And so it's the ultimate thing of not being able to break out of the focus on yourself and actually realize that there's a bigger world out there than just you. It's very dangerous for us to kind of focus in. And then if anyone disturbs that self-focus, and really that self-adoration, then they're a threat that needs to be destroyed. So here are 3 dragons that you find in the Chronicles of Narnia. And there's other ones as well. These are the 3 that we're going to talk about. Who's the guy in color?
Eustace.
That's Eustace Scrub. Who's the guy with the weird hair? He has several magic rings. This is Uncle Andrew. Uncle Andrew is the uncle you don't want to have. He is the villain, one of the villains in The Magician's Nephew, the creation story of Narnia. And then these guys down here, who do you think they are? They're in the last book, The Last Battle. They're the Dwarfs. We're going to talk about them as well. And there are good dwarves in Narnia, but these guys don't get it. So first, Uncle Andrew. And what the dragon sickness that he struggles with is what we call ciencia versus curitatis, or curiositas. Science versus curiosity. And we are going to use these words different than we normally use them. So this is what Uncle Andrew says. No great wisdom can be reached without sacrifice. Do you think that's a good thing to say? Got to have sacrifice in order to reach great wisdom? Now the problem with that is he applies this to a moment in the beginning of The Magician's Nephew, in which there are two children, his nephew and then a friend who lives next door, Diggory and Polly. And they find Uncle Andrew in this mad science laboratory. And Uncle Andrew says, "Great, I have my guinea pigs. I've actually been sending animals who touch these magic rings and they go off somewhere. But I don't, because they're animals, they aren't necessarily going to come back. So I don't know if there's anything over there. I need a human to test it on." And he uses this expression saying, no great wisdom can be reached without sacrifice. But do you see the twistedness there? I'm going to sacrifice you guys. I don't know what's going to happen, but I need someone to go over there in the name of science. Because then if you come back, then you can tell me that there's another world over there. But if not, well, I guess it's a failed experiment and we have to try something else. Imagine if you had an uncle like that. Kind of creepy. Now, with him, it says the rules don't apply to him. He always talks about saying, well, that's good to do science in this proper way and not, risk people and stuff like that, but I'm a great scientist. And so I'm doing something that no one else has done, and so it's worth risking two children in order to find something that is so important for the rest of humanity, whether there's another world out there. He uses immoral means to discover knowledge. So he's willing to sacrifice Polly and Diggory so he can know what's on the other side. He actually has a wicked godmother whose name is Morgana Le Fay, who was actually the sorceress in the story of King Arthur. And ultimately, somehow, she's in this story, and it talks about how she's in jail right now because of doing, he doesn't say exactly what, but says things that we won't talk about. But then ultimately, she's the one that kind of gives these magic rings and sort of has a conversion experience, I guess, in jail. But before she dies, she says, take these and bury them. Don't let anyone ever see them. And he disobeys what she says. Says, wow, these are really, really cool, so I'm going to see what they're going to do. And she apparently gained these rings through these bad ways. And so there's sort of a hint there of like demonic practices. Now, ultimately, Jabez of Charm, remember we talked about the White Witch from The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe? She appears in this first story of The Magician's Nephew. And she's another Uncle Andrew. Remember this whole idea of she uses the deplorable word. This word that when it's said in certain contexts and certain rites will kill all life on an entire world, except the person who says it. And she saw that people were trying to take her power. They were becoming a threat. So she said, I had to use this because they were going to take my throne. And so it's their fault that they all died. You see how, again, it's focused on, she doesn't understand that she just killed an entire world. She's like, it's their fault. They should have actually listened to me so that I didn't have to use this deplorable word. Uncle Andrew and this White Witch are actually very, very similar. Now, Diggory, he falls because he's the one who is curious about this bell that says, ring and find out what's going to happen. When he rings it, that brings the White Witch back to life, because she's kind of sleeping at that moment. And then the whole thing, kind of goes crazy after that. But he actually repents of that, and he changes. So that's kind of a sort of a saving grace that happens to him. And in all of this, you have curiosity, kuriositas, which means knowledge that's not ordered to God. So there's no hierarchy of the classical sciences. You understand, in classical science, you have theology, you have philosophy right below it, you have all the other sciences of astrology and mathematics and physics and all these different things. But you learn about the created world in order to give glory to God. When it's something about just having power without any connection to how is this going to give God glory, how is this going to love my brothers and sisters who are around me, then it becomes this evil in a sense. Science, called ciencia, is a knowledge that's ordered to God and ordered to truth, goodness, and beauty. Whereas curiosity, in this way of talking about it, this dragon sickness, is focused on, I'm the only one that matters, so how can I use knowledge to make myself more powerful and everyone else less? That's what's going on here. And Uncle Andrew says, I've discovered a world. So now he's in Narnia. So later on they find themselves in Narnia. I've discovered a world where everything is bursting with life and growth. So things are growing. The lamppost that you see in the Chronicles of Narnia actually came from the White Witch breaking off a bar in England and starting to attack like the police officers. And they're like, who is this person who's like 12 feet tall and is like attacking us and thinks she's queen of the world? And then that ultimately goes with them to Narnia, and it starts growing in place, and it becomes a giant lamppost. So Uncle Andrew is looking at all of this, and he's saying, wow, this place everything's growing so fast, it's a new world. And then he says this, he says, therefore the commercial possibilities of this country are unbounded. And Polly said, you're just like the witch. All you think of is killing things. Because ultimately, he says, well, I have to get rid of this lion Aslan. I'm going to have to shoot this lion. And then, and then this place will be mine, and I can use it for business. And again, it's sort of the sense of me, me, me. Everything else is expendable. Everything else can be used, not in goodness, but just to make myself more powerful. Now, pride kills the star. Humility breathes life into it. Does anyone know what that picture is of? So this is in the Voyage of the Dawn Treader. So this is a star. She's actually a star. And later on she marries King Caspian, Prince Caspian. But it's really interesting how stars are looked at in Narnia. A modern scientism that is blind to the wonder of creation holds to an impoverished view of creation. And this is what I talked about last time. If we think about love, and we might say, well, of course it's not this little chubby baby with wings who shoots little arrows and stuff like that. That's what the ancients believed, but we're more sophisticated. But then maybe like this one person in a Russian novel who said, really all love is just matter and molecules that are bouncing in my brain, creating a reaction, and that's actually the explanation. There's no spiritual reality to that. It's merely just a biological aspect. Or we can look at, all sorts of different things and just say, this baby right here is just a clump of cells that by chance, through different random circumstances, all kind of came together, and it looks like that, but it doesn't really have a purpose. It wasn't intended by someone beyond this world. It's just there, and it's going to disappear after a little while. But you might look at that and say, no, that's a baby. There's more than just a clump of cells there. There is an immortal being. There's something so far deeper than that. But again, modern scientism would sort of look at the star and say, as Eustace would say, in our world, a star is a huge ball of flaming gas. Remember like in, The Lion King or so, they're talking about the stars. So again, it's looking at it just a scientific explanation, and it is a huge ball of flaming gas. But look what this person, Ramadhu, who happens to be a retired star, says, even in your world, that's not what a star is, but only what it is made of. So think about that. That again, we'll look up in the stars and we'll say, of course that's not some person who's hanging out there and then comes down and looks like that. Okay, but which one is more true? To say that it's merely just random atoms that are there that's creating a gas, or that there's something mysterious in which even God said he knows the stars and calls each one by its name. Again, there's this wonder that fairy stories, because we can do this kind of thing in fairy stories, to have talking stars, to have waters that actually stand up and have this like personified aspect, but it's to remind us that even the simple star is actually far deeper and far richer than anything that we can imagine. And only God knows the depth of the mystery of that star. So we talked about this last time. H2O versus the river god. Which one's truer? Both are false, but quite possibly the river god maybe is more true. This is the idea of myths, reaching towards transcendent truth that moves beyond this world to say there's some sort of spiritual reality, there's something here that's just not just matter. There's something beautiful, majestic, that's beyond my ability to understand. There is life, there is death in the meaning of water. And it's more than just molecules that are bumped together. This is the same with like the nymphs and the dryads. The nymphs and the dryads are the sort of, in Narnia, are the spirits of the trees. So you have the talking trees, you have the water in a sense, again having this kind of divine flavor in a sense. And it goes back to that question of which is more true. Both are false, but one brings us to a deeper understanding. If you look at a tree, did any of you, when you came in, stop and just stare at the majesty and glory of a simple tree? These sentinels that stand there, sometimes for centuries, and they just have this beautiful way of reaching their arms up and giving praise to God every single season. They look like they're dead, they look like they're rocks, and then all of a sudden they come alive again. There's this mystery that you could just stare at a tree and wonder, maybe it's going to walk. I mean, there's something very beautiful about that. So, in talking about all of this, and talking about this idea of a possessive familiarity, or saying, I own something, versus this wonder, you have Tolkien and C.S. Lewis talk about the difference. They both use magic, because fairy story means magic, so it's a magical tale. That's the original meaning of what fairy is. But there's different ways that they use it, and you can think of it in terms of the magic of the elves and the sorcery of the Dark Lord, because it's a deep, powerful, powerful metaphor for understanding this whole idea of a dragon sickness versus this true healthy perspective on creation, on the dignity of the human person. So the two spectrums for Tolkien are enchantment, and that's the magic of the elves, and technology in a bad sense, which is sorcery. And think of techne and art. So these are different Greek understandings here, but looking at enchantment, you can think of how, like Arwen during the movie or Elrond during the book, calls upon the waters of the fords of Bruin as Frodo is riding across, wounded, as you have all these black riders coming after him, trying to take the ring. And what happens to those black riders? They get swept away by this magical, these waters that have like these steeds that are on there and all this different things. You have Galadriel as well, and the magic of the elves there. But it's this idea of being ultimate stewards of the reality of creation. And to, in a sense, have this surrender of saying, God is bigger, and God has placed a depth in every single tree, stone, stream, all these different things. And the way that I need to approach the goodness of creation is very much in this Franciscan understanding, and it's more of an ancient philosopher understanding, is creation, what are you? Who are you? And how do you lead me to see through the fingerprints that have been placed in you the glories of God the Creator? Notice this is different than pantheism. Pantheism is saying God is the tree, God is the rock, God is everywhere. This is God is the creator of all, but he makes everything so deep and glorious and majestic. And if we actually stop for a moment and even gaze into the eyes of another person, we see this mystery. And we can, in a sense, say, I figure this person out, I put them in a box. I, in a sense, sort of put them into a commodity that I can use or discard however I want. This is like how Pope Francis talks about the culture of disposal. The sense of we take people and then we throw them aside, throwaway culture. This is where we struggle with the dignity of human life on so many different levels. But even to the reality of creation, to be able to stop and allow the Lord to show his glory through creation. Do you see how that's different? That is a surrender. And ultimately, the magic of the elves is about how do I allow what is good, true, and beautiful in creation to come out full force. So you can think of, for instance, farming or pruning orchards. You have the ability to, nature as it's growing wild and stuff like that, will produce a certain way. But it will become even more beautiful and even more awe-inspiring when you actually apply the gifts, the art that we've been given to, in a sense, allow the harvest to become even greater. Where we take out the weeds, we take out the stones. But do you see how there's an art that goes in and honors nature and allows it to come forward? Versus, how do I, in a sense, instead of marveling at the beauty of an egg, how do I just crack it to make an omelet? How do I, in a sense, pillage to just serve me? That's the difference. And this is also coming from Tolkien's experience. Tolkien said, he actually said one of the worst inventions that ever was created was the automobile. That's Tolkien, that's not me. But his whole point was we were in communities, we were connected to the land, and our forefathers were there, and there before, and there was this whole, in a sense, like heritage. And we were much more like connected to the goodness of creation, and we honored it and were better stewards. But for all the good that the automobile has done, what happens is it spreads families apart. There's busyness. Everyone is kind of moving. There's not a community that has known, sort of the small town feeling in a sense. There's, in a sense, the sense of we're hungering for more community. We have this ability and mobility and stuff, but we've forgotten how to actually sit and just have tea with someone. We haven't, this whole experience of owning a farm that has been for 400 years, 1,000 years. You go to Israel, you actually see orchards that belong to people, family going down 1,000 years or so. And there's something very beautiful there. So again, I'm not critiquing the auto industry or anything like that, but I just encourage you just to think about this idea of the technology aspect. And is it something that has actually sort of taken us away from the roots of our humanity, which is to be connected to the goodness of creation, to be good stewards of it? You know, and that's the other side, which is the technology aspect, the technological magic. And if you notice Sauron, if you notice Saruman in The Lord of the Rings, they're the ones with the machines. And even Tolkien would say, the machines that the goblins made, I bet they were the ones who created the poisonous gas that was used in World War I to create the machine gun, the tank, all these different things. In The Hobbit, he actually talks about the goblins are smart, but they're clever, but they're using their knowledge, in a sense, in a non-good way. You can even think of the deplorable word, almost in a sense, in some ways, as being even an image of a nuclear bomb, nuclear holocaust. I have a technology, I have a power that if I am threatened, if I use this in a certain moment, then I have the ability to wipe out the entire world. So again, these are the things that Tolkien and Lewis were growing up in this world in which they experienced World War II, in which 1 million people in a battle would be mowed down with a machine gun. And they were saying this technology has a two-edged sword. It's actually leading us away from our humanity. So again, this is the world of Tolkien and Lewis, and why you see this kind of, the bad guys have the mechanisms, whereas the good guys a lot of times have more of the reality of creation. So that's kind of their particular worlds there. And you can think of technology, the sorcery of technology, of technological magic, is instead of honoring and being a steward of creation, it's seeking to control nature in order to control others, to dominate over another. One ring to rule them all, one ring to bind them, one ring to bring them all in the darkness, bind them. The sense of, again, this dragon sickness is, I am the Lord, and I am going to use all the knowledge, all the gifts that I have, just like Satan himself, one of the brightest of the angels, fallen. He uses all of that wisdom that he has in order to hurt and to dominate, and to, in a sense, push everyone down so he can be Lord. And that's why he says, better to reign in hell than to serve in heaven. So we could go a lot into this, but I encourage you just to think about, how does this play out in your own life? I mean, even think about the reality of iPhones. I have an iPhone, they're very good, but do they ever sort of feel like they control you instead of you controlling them? You can use it in powerful ways to be connected to others. Facebook's another thing, to be able to really connect in such powerful ways, but if you look at what's happening within civilization right now, we're learning how not to think anymore. We don't know how to really reason because we're just getting instant things right in front of us. And also what's happening is it's kind of creating very vicious divides in the Facebook social media world, because you can say things when you're not face-to-face in a human context. You can say things and you can bully and you can do like that. That's more deadly and dangerous than anything you could say face-to-face. And that's why the cyberbullying can be such a threat to our young people. Again, it's a technology that is supposed to be used to bring people together, but it's the technological magic, it's the sorcery that in a sense is saying, I'm going to use this technology because I know it can hurt someone. So we think about that, think about how do we use that. That was a long digression, but it's important though. So now we're going to talk about the dwarves. And the dwarves are for the dwarves. Now these guys, this is in the last battle, and this is a part in which all these Narnians go through the door that leads into Aslan's country. Now the dwarves are sitting there, and they are complaining about how they're in this horrible, dark, stinking stable. And it's damp, and there's manure, and there's all these different things. And yet the rest of the children of Narnia are seeing this beautiful countryside. And there's beautiful food, there's beautiful water. And so the different children try to offer something to the dwarves. Saying, here's some water. Like, oh, why are you giving me that horrible water from the trough? Or here's some food. What? You just threw manure at me. It's because, this is what Aslan says, you see, they will not let us help them. They have chosen cunning instead of belief. Their prison is only in their own minds. Yet they are in that prison, and so afraid of being taken in that they cannot be taken out. And this is, again, this dragon sickness that in a sense says, I'm only going to trust me. And I'm not going to leave any room for anything that's beyond what I can see, feel, sense, anything of this world. Again, it's this idea. Actually, I just talked to someone recently who is really struggling with, it's a young person, but they are stuck in this kind of scientism of saying there's nothing beyond this world. And so this young man was holding his little baby sister, and this is where I talked about, okay, what's that? Is that just according to certain categories, an atheistic category, that there's no afterlife, there's no meaning, there's no God, there's no spirit, then that is just a clump of cells that is here for a moment. It doesn't have any sort of purpose or meaning other than what you give to it, and then it just disappears. Is that deeply what your heart is saying? And you can see he was struggling with it, but he wanted to hold the line. And he said, yeah, I'm just giving meaning to my sister. And I love my sister, but it's not coming from anywhere outside. It's coming from this biological process, but I'm choosing to, in a sense, intend that. And it was like there was this wall. He was like one of the dwarves, saying, I'm not going to be taken in, this fear of doubt. Maybe there's a 0.000 chance that everything here is random. And so I'm going to, until God gives me 100% certainty, I'm going to doubt. And I'm going to say there is no God unless God himself shows himself to me and says, I'm God. But then even if that happened, the person would probably say, well, that was just an illusion of my mind. And again, this is what the dwarves fall into. And they're stuck. They don't get to go into Aslan's country because they're so afraid of having faith, of trusting, that there's more than just what their senses tell them, that they're stuck and they're forever imprisoned in their own minds. And now we talk about Eustace. So there was a boy called Eustace Clarence Scrub, and he almost deserved it. This is kind of a weird passage in the Voyage of the Dawn Treader. So Eustace did not call his father and mother, but Harold and Alberta. And the parents actually wanted him to call them Harold and Alberta. They were very up-to-date and advanced people. They were vegetarians, non-smokers, teetotalers, and wore special kind of underclothes. What the heck is that all about? That's weird. Well, that's actually, all of those things was a particular group in England that he's commenting on right now, that were the people that followed George Bernard Shaw. And I'll talk about him later, because he's a Shavian monster in a sense. Now Eustace liked animals, especially beetles, if they were dead and pinned on a card. He liked books if they were books of information and had pictures of grain elevators or fat foreign children doing exercises in model schools. Again, it's really weird, but these are the words in The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. And again, it's this idea of information, but without really an ordering to anything but just I know stuff. Now, this is the guy that C.S. Lewis is directly saying that Eustace and his family are in the midst of this guy's world. George Bernard Shaw, 1856 to 1950, he was someone that scorned tradition and history. He treated them with indifference and contempt. He said, everything of the past is worthless, and I am so much more enlightened, and so let's just get rid of everything of the past, anything of the ancients, because they were all dumb people. Man is constantly progressing towards a better future. And the newer is always better. Just because it's newer, just because it's progress, means that it's better. This is a little like, if you study philosophy, there's a guy named Hegel, and it's this idea of everything moving toward is always going to be better. Now, he admired Hitler, he admired Mussolini, he admired Stalin. He insisted on this Nietzschean Superman. So this is his idea of progress, is we are moving beyond good and evil, beyond conventional morality. And people like Hitler they should be admired because at least they have the courage to, in a sense, become great by recognizing that they need to, in a sense, smash everyone else, make themselves powerful supermen because they have the will to dominate. Doesn't that sound like the magic of the Dark Lord? This sense of, I want knowledge in order to control and to dominate. And this is the dragon sickness. If you think about this idea of, I'm the most important person in the world, I'm going to use everyone else in order to lift me up. So I'm going to step on everybody else, and I'm going to make a tower out of their bodies. So that's the reality of what he liked. And he said it's okay to squash people in the name of progressing mankind forward to be greater. This is like the Uncle Andrew again, saying, I can sacrifice my nephew and his friend because something great is going to happen through it. His rationalism blinded him to reason, and his realism divorced him from reality. And his plays, C.S. Lewis hated because they just had these very weird kind of worlds which sort of focused on this idea of the great man and everyone else just sort of getting squashed. I'm not an expert on, this is what I've understood C.S. Lewis saying. But he sounds like kind of a strange guy. So then we go from this Shavian arrogance to Christian humility. And this happens in the Voyage of the Dawn Treader. This happens with Eustace becoming a dragon. And then he has to, in a sense, be undragoned. But first of all, Eustace believes he has nothing to learn from his inferiors and from tales of the past. If you remember, when he's talking about the Voyage of the Dawn Treader, he's always talking about, I'm just so much smarter than all of you guys. I have all this stuff. I have all this knowledge. And all of these stupid fairy stories and children's stories and things like that, they're just for weak people like you. I'm the enlightened ones. And progress is good, even if it means you crush everyone else to become better. So he denies the existence of dragons and is in consequence unable to see that he himself is a dragon, a monster who wants to lay Fairyland to waste. So he's killed his imagination. This is again the dragon sickness, where he doesn't have wonder anymore. He's killed his imagination, and he doesn't see anything outside of himself. And if you think of Reepicheep, is the opposite. Reepicheep is always talking about going to the ends of the world, this sort of heroic quest. I mean, he's almost like Don Quixote's like to dream the impossible dream, like this sense of going on And ultimately, he goes on because he remembers the stories of the past, and it gives him courage to go forward. So the healing comes when Eustace falls asleep on a dragon treasure, and he becomes a real dragon. He then sees what has really been on the outside. So he actually starts to become more human when he's a dragon. So there's a healing that happens, that he starts to recognize that he starts to feel alone. He starts to realize that he needs others, whereas before he's like, I don't need any of you. I'm better than all of you, and I don't want to hang out with you because you're all stupid. And now he's starting to open up. Now the beautiful thing is the ones who recognize him first. Who are the ones that recognize Eustace when you see this dragon? And there are two people who point out, this has to be Eustace. Who are the two children that came to Narnia during the Voyage of the Dawn Tread? The two youngest, Lucy and Edmund. Lucy discovers, because of her innocence, her name means the light. She just has this beautiful way of being able to see the goodness, and because of just the lack of real sin, and she has this innocence there, she's able to actually see who this dragon really, really is, to actually see on the inside, and to see that there's a hurting heart that's crying out for mercy. Now Edmund sees because of experience. He is treated more as a human than before. So Eustace is treated more as a human than before. And especially by Rinpoche, who brings to him the treasure of the wisdom of the past. Remember, the Shavian people said, the past, all this stuff, we just need to get rid of in the name of progress. It's all worthless. They're all dumb people. We're the enlightened ones. So that's why Rinpoche is sitting there saying, hey, I want to tell you the stories about dragons of the past, of, in a sense, these different stories like that. Now Aslan undragons him in an excruciating process of peeling away his scaly skin. And he uses the word excruciating because that's from the cross. Crucio is cross. Cruciform. Excruciating means to suffer from the cross. And Aslan, what he does is he takes his claws, he goes into the ground, and he goes like that, and all of a sudden the claws appear on the dragon's scales of Eustace, and little by little he rips off that old man and allows the new man to come forward. And this whole image of learning how to suffer is how to learn how to love, and the importance of seeing both of them together. Whereas the dragon sickness is, I don't want to suffer, I don't want to get out of my comfort zone, I don't want to risk anything to help another person. I would rather that they, fall away than myself get, pricked on the finger or something like that. That's kind of an extreme version. And what he does ultimately, Aslan, is he plunges him into water, and he becomes a boy again, which is an image of baptism. So what happens to Eustace is he has the enchantment of the dragon. It actually opens him up to see who he was. And then as he starts having the inner healing of being confronted and growing in humility, saying, I need others, I need Aslan, then ultimately it teaches him and it changes him. And he'll become a main character in the next book, The Silver Chair, and he learns, just like Edmund learned from experience, Eustace does this too. So in conclusion, breaking free of the dragon sickness, and I love this image here of, does anyone know what that's from? Sleeping Beauty, one of my favorites. So the cross and crucified love is the way that you free yourself from the dragon sickness. This is why Jesus says, take up your cross daily and follow me. Because if we, in a sense, don't take up our cross, we can't really learn how to love. We can't really learn how to sacrifice for one another. Imagine in a relationship in which the relationship is focused on yourself